So starting with 321, that's our next release that's coming up. We're currently targeting that for end of October. So I think we're looking at something like 8 weeks or so now. We've got some incremental improvements on some of the work we did in 321. So the ability to match services and network policy, which we did in 321. We're going to be adding support for the Windows data plane, so that'll work on Windows nodes. And
Casey,
we'll also, yep.
You just said 321, but you meant 320, right?
Perhaps we added it in 320, and the upcoming release is 321.
Okay. All right.
Erik, I'm just getting distracted by something. Would you be able to pick up the minutes for a moment?
Sure.
Sorry about that.
So yeah, we'll be adding that to the Windows data plane, and we'll also be making that work with ingress rules, where currently can only be specified on egress rules. And then sort of an implementation detail, but under the covers, that's looking at the Kubernetes endpoint slices API. And we'll be updating to use the V1 version of that API rather than the V1 beta version. Now that we've got a sizable buffer between when that API was introduced. So I don't remember off the top of my head what that means for version compatibility. I think it's Kubernetes 1.16, but I would need to double check that. We're working on the ability to run Calico as non-root with most likely some limitations there. That'll likely be an option when you're installing with the operator to run as a non-privileged non-root. With thanks to the VPP folks, Nathan and Aloys, we're also looking at removing dependency on port map plugin. I think that's something they're interested in for the VPP data plane. And we're also interested in, just in terms of reliability, we've had a bunch of issues with that third-party plugin in the past. So I think we've already merged the first bit of that to add port map, host ports to Calico's data model. And next steps will be the actual data plane implementing that. And I know I've got a PR that I'll review on for the VPP folks in the CNI plugin. I think we also have a few improvements coming in the auto host endpoint controller. We've got a bit more information to work with now than when we implemented that. So we're going to be adding some additional IP addresses to the endpoints that get generated there. And lastly, we're hoping to do a pretty big docs refresh to update some of the docs to be more operator centric. Now that that's been sort of out for a while, I think a lot of the how-to documentation and install docs are still very manifest centric, and some of them don't even include steps for how to do things with the operator. So we want to make a big push there and improve all those. Those are the main things for 321. Obviously, it's still a ways out, so some of that may change and get added to as we go, but that's what we're looking at the moment. I see Reza on the call. Do you want to talk a little bit about some of the ARM work you've been helping out with?
Sure. Just a disclaimer. like the whole thing started with me wanting to add an ARM node to my cluster. And since my own cluster is using Calico and eBPF, I had to go and change everything to get that thing working. Anyhow, thanks to eBPF folks, everything was there, but there was just a need of some tweaks into the make file. I did those things, and it's now merged with the main branch of our repository, so you can actually test it. And I think for the future, there's going to be API server ARM64 support, because the operator by default installs the API server. And for some reaon, Quai.io doesn't support multi-arc images, or we are not pushing it. So that will be the next two steps.
So I think that it does now support the multi-architecture images, but we just haven't gotten our infrastructure to push them yet. But that's on the list as well. So you've, just to clarify, you've got ARM support working with the eBPF data plane now, as well as I think you updated the operator to run on ARM, which it previously didn't.
Yep, correct.
Very cool.
Yeah, that's nice. Awesome. Well done, Reza.
Thank you.
I could just draw attention to a couple of things that Aloys and Nathan, who I believe are both on, they are both on the call, and I have been working on. Aloys and I are doing a KubeCon talk in October, which is Calico VPP using Calico's pluggable data planes for fun and fast networking. We have finished that off now. I think it's a worthwhile session, so I just wanted to draw people's attention to it. That'll be in KubeCon if you're attending. And Nathan Skribzak and I are doing a different talk at the Open Networking and Edge Summit 2021, which is about using Calico VPP and WireGuard together for low trust edge network scenarios to kind of guarantee securing your payloads and your communication on the wire as well. I think we're pretty much done with that one as well. So I think, again, that will be a good session. I just wanted to draw people's attention to it.
Chris, can you add to the doc what that second one was?
Yeah, they both roll off the tongue. So I'll make sure they're both in there. Thanks.
Thanks, Chris. Aloys or Nathan, was there any other VPP stuff you wanted to talk about?
Hey everyone. A couple updates on our side. Thanks Chris for mentioning the talks we've been preparing. That's been keeping us busy the last few weeks. Actually, before that, we released a new version of the VPP data plane that comes with Calico's 3.20. So it adds kind support and also the service-based policy rules that Casey you mentioned at the beginning of the call. And there are also a few fixes in there around MTU and some VPP fixes around chain buffers handling, which would cause issues with large MTUs. So that's it for the previous release. Now for the next one, we are focusing on the host port support. So yeah, it's a bit synchronized with your effort as well in getting rid of the port map plugin. So that was nice. We're looking as well at the best way to integrate VPP in the operator. And we are adding support for multiple interfaces. So right now the VPP, well, when you use the VPP data plane, it only takes one interface from the host. and uses that for all the pod traffic, and that needs to be his interface that owns the node IP in Kubernetes, otherwise things break. We're trying to relax the requirements around that and allow VPP to handle more than one interface. And actually, the biggest feature we've been working on is support for memIF and for the host stack. And maybe Nathan, you want to say a few words about that, since you've been doing it?
Sure. So memIF support should be ready to merge. So it's packet-oriented interfaces exposed as abstract sockets in the pod, in addition to the regular tune interface. And VCL is supported, albeit not stable yet. So things still break when you try to delete pod. But you can start consuming the protocol stack from VPP from within the pod, attached to an abstract socket the same way. And we around this, we built a couple of test client and servers to make interesting performance measurements. Not all those are yet transferable to Linux-based interfaces, but we'll try to craft some new numbers around that also. And part of those numbers will go as fuel for the talks that Chris mentioned earlier. And hopefully those will be integrated in the next release that we make of Calico. So try to benchmark a bit, to troubleshoot before publishing something.
Yeah, next release probably is going to be after Calico 3.21. And yeah.
Great. Thanks, guys. Do anybody have any questions for Aloys or Nathan? Or Reza or myself? If, sorry, what's that? If not, then we've got some hot issues coming up to talk about, I think. I think there are a few things that Erik and I wanted to discuss a little bit.
Yeah.
Erik, I'll start.
Okay.
I'll start taking notes now.
Oh, okay. Thank you. So the first thing is something that we've gotten a few reports on, and something that we knew would be an issue is is using the operator and cluster auto scaling when your cluster needs to get down to just a few nodes. Right now, the operator is scaling Typha based on the nodes and trying to keep the number of Typhas at a good high availability level. So when you have just a few nodes, it wants to run a few Typhas. So when you have 1, 2, or 3 nodes, it is going to have that many Typhas. So if you're at 2 nodes, you'll have 2 Typhas, and the issue with that when trying to scale down is that the autoscalers want to evict pods and get them scheduled to other nodes, but because Typha is host network, you can only have 1 per node. So when there are 2 nodes, 2 Typhas, and the autoscaler goes to evict one to free up that node so it can be autoscaled down, there's nowhere else for that Typha to go, resulting in the autoscaler not being able to reduce that. And I guess this is a little bit more than just autoscaling, I guess. There's also issues with like rolling node upgrade, or in clouds, like when you're rolling a node group, most of the time it will add a new node and then take down one of the old ones. Well, when that happens with the operator is going to see that new node, and let's say you had 2, it adds 1 to replace 1. that new node's going to be detected and another Typha is going to be deployed. So then you're going to be stuck with 3 nodes because the rolling upgrade is going to want to evict the pods from the one that it wants to take down, and it can't do that because, again, there's no place for that Typha to be moved to. So I think that is the main issue that we are we're trying to talk about here. If anybody has any tweaks to that or think there's an important piece that I'm missing explaining, please feel free to chime in. I see a few more people here today, so hopefully there's some that are. Oh, Matt, yeah.
Hi.
Hey.
Yeah, I think I appreciate you guys bringing it up. Thanks for inviting us to this. There's a couple of people on this call. We work at nextdoor.com, and so we're using Calico on our environment, and everything is running in Amazon. So we ran into this problem several times, and I'm trying to dig through the Tigera repo right now to understand whether or not this has been fixed. It seems like there's reports in the PR that a change went out that might have fixed it, but then I can't seem to find that change right now. So I was hoping maybe you could give us like an update on just what the current state is of the operator in like its latest version.
Sure. So I think there is a change that I know what you're referring to. I believe that I actually Turk, or Dan, you might know because you added it. The unschedulable nodes, we stopped counting those for Typha scaling purposes. So I don't know if you remember why we added that. But yeah, that my understanding is that now that the operator is ignoring unschedulable nodes for the purposes of counting nodes for Typha scaling, that has addressed issues in EKS, especially around node upgrades. Let's see, I think that's what I can't remember if that specific bug was talking about the upgrades.
I think there are a few related issues in this area. I've got them pulled up here. So the one that you're talking about was, I think it doesn't fix the auto scaling case where you want to scale down a node because the autoscaler never gets a chance to mark the node as unschedulable. So the way that the cluster autoscaler seems to work is that it does a sort of mock rescheduling of the pods on that node before it does anything. So if that mock rescheduling fails and it says there's nowhere to put these pods, it will just leave the node intact. So I think that issue still exists, but the other problem that was kind of in this area was that we give Typha pretty permissive tolerations. Really, it tolerates everything. I think that was originally done to ensure that the cluster continues to work because it's a pretty critical component. And if you end up tainting a node accidentally and pushing Typha off of your cluster, that will break things. But one of the consequences of that is that Typha doesn't act kind of the way you'd expect when you taint a node as unschedulable. It still says I should belong here. So I think the fix that we're talking about here that did go in was around that. So if you've got, say, a bunch of unschedulable nodes in your cluster, we won't try to scale up the number of Typhas in order to satisfy that.
So those two things sound kind of different to me. When I just found that Typha.go render file, right? And on line 420, it says the pod spec for the Typha pods is tolerate all. And that sort of seems orthogonal to whether or not your auto scaler, in the operator is trying to scale up or scale down the Typhas based on cluster size. And that's why I'm a little confused by the report that somebody said that they've done the upgrade and it works on a more modern operator, because the tolerate all is still there, which means fundamentally, right, the Kubernetes scheduler is still the one scheduling the Typha pod, right? And so it's still the one that's going to ignore the unschedulable taint. Am I correct?
If it was only up to that. So the
Okay.
other piece is that because of the way we're auto scaling Typha, when we look at the nodes and see that there's an unschedulable one, we won't count those unschedulable nodes as input to how many Typhas we need to deploy. So let's say you had three, or well, let's do 2 nodes, because that's I know that would be a problem. So if you had 2 nodes and we're doing a node upgrade, the first thing, I think the first thing that EKS does is it puts that the taint on the, or not taint.
Yep.
Right word. Yeah.
They taint it with their own unschedulable taint.
Right. So that will reduce the number of nodes that Typha is calculating as it needs to account for. So then the number of Typhas that is going to be scaled will, it won't be the full 3 set of
Okay,
nodes.
I get it. And
So you're
so
not
in
going
the
to end up with 3 Typhas. You'll end up with 1 or 2.
Okay.
So there will be
It's
a free node,
sort of.
so those pods can be moved around.
All right. I would argue that I think then the person's test is probably not comprehensive, right? Because that's a unique situation as well, that you only have 2 nodes in your cluster. The situation we have, just that we've run into, and on 8 or 9 clusters now, I run into this on 9 out of 10 upgrades or 8 out of 9 upgrades, right? Is that we have nodes that our engineering pods run on, right? Are the applications that all of our developers are building and running, and kind of that's the major compute side of the farm. And then we have dedicated nodes for running what we call system level resources, core DNS, Typha, a handful of operators, things where we just don't want any user pods on them at all. And we put in a node selector to run Typha on those pods, right? To make sure that no user space application can ever, no engineering application could ever impact these things. But those, what we call system nodes, we don't run very many of them. We get away with 1 per AZ, actually. So like 1 per zone. And we have an auto scaling group for each one of them, because that's the way Amazon and the cluster auto scaler want to work. So the upgrade process is like, there's 3 Typhas running because we have, call it 20 or 30 nodes in our cluster, but those 3 Typha pods are running on each of our kube system pod nodes. So they, the scheduler tries to mark it as unschedulable and launch a new node. But even though it's launched a new node, the Kubernetes scheduler, at a seemingly high rate of sort of randomness, tends to put that Typha pod right back on the same node, right? So the EKS node group upgrader, evicts the pod and it just gets scheduled right back there, the vast majority of the time. So is there any, I'm curious if anyone here feels strongly that you guys kind of need to enforce this tolerate all toleration. It seems kind of like a 1 or a 2 line change, or to remove that, or to probably more lines than that, to make it configurable, right? So that the operators can make their own decisions based on their own topology.
So I would in my mind, I feel like trying to force Typha somewhere there's no reason for that. There's enough Typhas that are high availability, and like trying to force them somewhere, I think is just counterproductive. You may
What do you mean by
disagree.
forcing? Like, do you mean like in the event that I'm trying to evict all the pods on a node, that I shouldn't be able to evict the Typha pod?
No,
Okay.
no, that you're pushing them all to your what you refer to them as master nodes or whatnot. Like they're
Okay.
in our mind, I think we've generally said, they should be able to run anywhere. There's plenty of redundancy with the number, that's why we're scaling up Typha and handle that scaling to ensure that there's always enough there. So even if a node goes down, there's plenty of other backups.
I think his concern was kind of keeping his workloads separate, Eric. So that might be something we should look into. Like, just if I sort of heard the concern correctly, you sort of want to keep your workloads separate from your system components. So, if someone breaks out of a pod, then they can't access your system components, or they can't like use loads of CPU and divert it from Typha when it needs it, or whatever.
Or network.
Yeah, those are the kind of concerns that you're more worried about than the.
Yeah. And I hear you, Eric, what you're saying there. But I sort of feel like if you guys felt that strongly about it, you wouldn't allow me to set a node selector either.
Yes.
Right. It's sort of like
I think what you're saying is legitimate, and I do think that for a lot of people, they don't have those strong concerns. But
yeah, I'm good with a default. That makes sense.
Are you using the node selector that has the big warning that says don't use unless you are absolutely sure?
Probably. I probably am. I'm not gonna, power tools, right?
Yeah.
I think I feel a little less strongly than Erik does. I'm sort of the opinion that we probably got it wrong being so aggressive in our toleration of things, because like, when are you going to have a cluster with no nodes that are schedulable? Because there's not much point to that sort of cluster. And
well, it seems like if you've done that, you've shot yourself in the foot in other ways.
You've already broken the cluster. So,
and the main reason that we need tolerations is we need to make sure the cluster bootstraps itself. Like, we need to make sure that Typha and Calico node are schedulable in order to bootstrap the cluster, because we need to make sure networking comes up so other things can come up. So it might be wrong to tolerate all, but we probably need like a deep understanding of the tolerations and to go through it with a fine-tooth comb to make sure we tolerate everything we really, really need to tolerate to make sure clusters will definitely come up. Maybe we stuck tolerate all on there just because we weren't sure exactly what we needed.
Definitely before, when we first introduced this, it was before they had sort of fine-grained condition-based tolerations, which was something that came about. I mean, it's been a while now, but when we first added Typha, I think it was just schedulable or unschedulable, and they've since added more fine-grained, like schedulable because there's no network, schedulable because blah blah blah. So yeah, we should look at that.
Okay. And it sounds like right now the recommendation would be, get rid of the node selector and take the risk that Typha gets scheduled on a node, which is not the end of the world for us in the short term. But we do feel like I feel like as the operator of the cluster, right? Like, these are my decisions to make, not and so having defaults is great, but having overrides is better.
Yeah. Yeah, I mean, Erik, how do you feel about just giving a knob to control those tolerations? It seems like an appropriate companion to the node selector that we already added. And we can add an appropriate warning saying, make sure you're actually tolerating enough to let this run.
Maybe a bigger warning, I guess.
I was gonna say, do people read our warnings? Yeah,
Erik,
yeah.
nobody reads
The
documentation.
warning, yeah, the warning is not actually to prevent people from doing something wrong. It's to say, I told you so when they come to us afterwards.
Do we pay attention to the node selector when we're identifying how many nodes Typha should run on? Because we should probably cap the number of Typhas that we try to run at the number of nodes that match the node selector and are schedulable and good and so on.
I would go. I don't think we use that. I guess to start.
I don't know that
I'm pretty sure
that one's weird because we have an auto scaler on those nodes, right? So like if a Typha pod gets, if we have 3 nodes and the deployment decides it needs a 4th, then we'll spin up another system node, right? So otherwise I could see a really unintended consequence of like our system nodes never scaling up and all of our compute nodes scaling up massively and having a challenge.
Yeah, that's interesting. I was gonna. I mean that. Yeah, that sounds like the right way to be doing it. Before you said that, my thought was that if we do that, if we did a check, what I would expect us to do is just to, if nothing else, degrade the status and report that hey, it looks like you don't have enough nodes for Typha. But I guess that would be bubbled up anyway, because when we scaled up Typha, when all of them weren't ready, I think that would be reported in Tigera status also.
Yeah, I think my idea falls down when you consider the auto scaling case, because if the whole point is that you scale up Typha and that forces a new node to be added, we could end up like gradually scaling it down or something stupid and end up with just one, and then that one gets killed for some reason and your node group goes to 0, or I don't know. Yeah, these things are a bit tricky.
Yeah, I recognize that like the challenge of bootstrapping is tricky, right? That makes sense. I would say that while it's nice to have an operator that tries to do everything for you, the more you guys try to think about every single situation and try to plan a default set of rules that are sort of not adjustable, the more you're going to run into problems where someone like me comes in and says, hey, but what about my environment? So I would always default to as much flexibility as possible while having a good set of defaults that you feel comfortable with. That's just my 2 cents. And I'm going to remove the node selector now and just upgrade Typha because I'm tired of being stuck on an old version.
I think that is totally fair. And where my head's at now is we should just add a companion to the node selector that lets you set tolerations. Because everything that we try to do to work around this, somebody else will have some issue with in their environment, and
we should definitely see if we can find a safer default for the toleration as well.
I think we can do both. We can look for a safer default. We can make it overridable. I think I may have lost a little bit of the discussion. So there was this issue around auto scaling down, where the number of Typhas equals the number of nodes. And I think that's different from what we have just been talking about with the node upgrade, where Typha gets rescheduled to the same node.
Agreed.
So this tolerations override will help the rolling update case where you add a node and then remove one, because Typha will get kicked to the new node and you can get rid of the old one without issue. But the scaling down case still has a problem, I think. And the only thing that I was able to really brainstorm up there was adjusting the number of replicas that we run to always be one less than the number of nodes rather than equal to at that small scale. I think that just means when you're scaling down, there's always another place that Typha can go. You don't get this deadlock situation.
What is, I don't totally understand that situation you guys are talking about, right? Like what's if you have a one node cluster and you,
Yes.
we
don't have a
I guess if
solution
you
for
have,
that yet.
yeah.
Well,
Okay.
I
So if
think
you have
we
a
don't
one node
fully
cluster,
understand.
You mark it unschedulable, everything gets, most things get punted off of it, I guess. Typha would get punted, but a new node would get booted, presumably, because you've got a one node cluster and you must be launching a new node. And then Typha would spin up on that. Right? I mean,
So I
I don't totally understand that race condition.
The one node cluster is a weirder situation. I think the one we're talking about now is, imagine a 3-node cluster. Okay. And the cluster autoscaler determines that it should actually be a 2-node cluster in order to best satisfy all the pods that need to be running without running too many nodes. So it says, okay, I need to get rid of a node, and it finds a candidate to remove. The way that it determines if a node is a candidate for removal is that it checks all of the pods running on that node to see if they can be rescheduled. So it does this sort of fake scheduling decision, and it notices, oh, I can't reschedule Typha because there are no available nodes that I could move this Typha to. And so it does that for each node and determines all of these nodes are critical.
Mm-hmm.
And so it can't get rid of any of them. But what it doesn't realize is that if it were to delete one of those nodes, we would just say, okay, now we only need 2 Typhas, not 3.
Oh, okay. Okay. Tell people to run more nodes.
Maybe when you have...
Okay, I get it. That's a really bizarre one, but okay.
Maybe when you have fewer than 3 nodes, you should convert Typha to be a daemon set, Casey. It's like, yeah, no.
We didn't think about that
crazy.
One, Casey. Yeah,
not crazy. I'll stick that one in my pocket and chew on it a little bit.
I think the switching between the two would cause some sort of disruption that's hard to work around. I don't know. I wonder if there's some way to mark Typha as like, ignore me for auto scaling decisions.
No.
But
there isn't.
Yeah, you look.
Yeah, I even if you follow one of those links that's in the meeting minutes, I did open a feature request for the Kubernetes cluster autoscaler to just have some kind of way to know that this was trying to be done, or if there was a way to ignore deployments. I didn't get any response on that, or if there was a way that the intention of scaling down could be known. Because then on the fly we could say, oh, okay, now we'll reduce Typha scale by 1 to be able to satisfy or allow that to happen. But yeah,
they can't, right? Because they would have to interface with the operator.
Well, no, I mean, if they could somehow mark nodes, or if there was some, yeah, no,
They do.
uh,
They
most of
mark
that
them.
marking happens after
yeah,
they have determined a node is viable to be deleted, though.
yeah.
So we
So we don't know
and
the intention that it's trying to do that, just that it has already decided to do that, which it won't ever decide.
Yep.
Well, I mean, okay, yeah, playing devil's advocate here, right? Like they are marking them with the unschedulable taint to tell you they're doing an upgrade. Like
but I
it's
think so I need to actually play with the autoscaler for this situation because I haven't tried this yet. But based on a code read of that bit of code, I think it won't mark it as unschedulable until it passes this check that
okay.
that it can remove the pods from the node.
No, I think that's on the cluster autoscaler, right?
Yeah.
It sounded like Erik was talking about the AWS EKS managed node group upgrade.
Yes.
Otherwise, I got
something else,
confused.
I think.
So,
but I don't want to. I think we've talked quite a bit about this, and we have some steps for the tolerations. So,
thank you guys very much, by the way, for sort of hearing our gripes and grievances. I appreciate it.
Of course, we don't want to cause gripes and grievances. So thanks for coming on and helping us work through it. I think we'll add a config option for that. We'll look into the better defaults for bootstrapping the cluster and see if anything's possible there. And I'll take an action to try out this downgrade case, or the scaling down case, which I think we still don't have an exact solution for, but
yeah, I was going to say we haven't. I mean, the only solution that we are really considering, I think, right now is that reducing the count on small clusters. So if anybody has input on if that would be acceptable or not to them, I would appreciate hearing that if anybody has objections to that.
I think that would be fine. Running 2 Typhas at 3 nodes is overkill anyway. The only reason we run Typha at that small scale is so we don't have to have some scale where we do a nasty transition from no Typha to Typha.
Yeah,
I think running 2, like at that very low scale, like Typha is going to restart in like under a second, and the Felix connected to it's going to restart in under a second, and it's all gonna be fine, I think.
So we've got quite a few things left, I think. So I think we should try to move on to some of these and see where we get to. Was there anyone here who wanted to talk about the Helm namespace argument behavior? I think that was another one that we had tagged to discuss here. If it's just me and Erik, then we could probably take it offline.
You're not doing that one. Nichos, are you on the call? I believe you might be. Maybe not. So we had a user in Calico users who raised an interesting question. He said he might be able to make it here, but wasn't sure based on his time zone. And I said I would pick it up if not. I thought he might be on the call, but perhaps not. So I think it's probably a relatively simple one. He just flagged that he deployed 3.20 via the operator, and he wanted to use the Go API, and he did that successfully in a K3S cluster and was able to apply a simple policy via the Golang API. But when he tried to do the same thing in his EKS cluster, it didn't work for him. He got no matches for kind network policy, it seemed like it didn't recognize the resource type. He said the only difference between the two environments, the K3S and the EKS, were they're both deployed via the same Helm chart, Tigera operator 320, and the only difference he's aware of is that the installation.kubernetes provider was set to EKS rather than anything else. It looks like Nitros, have I covered that correctly?
Yes, thank you. Just to add that the use case here is that we are using Calico only for enforcing network policy. So in our EKS cluster, we have AWS CNI, not Calico CNI.
Yeah, right. So I didn't get much beyond that. I decided we should discuss it here, but
I mean, yeah, the first thing I would double check is that the API server is actually running on that cluster. If it is, then to my knowledge, it should work fine on EKS. We have done that before.
Okay, can I ask a question?
Of course.
The API server is some kind of pod that is visible with a simple kubectl command.
Yep. Yeah, you can.
It's not there.
Namespace. Okay.
It's not there.
Then that gets launched when you create the API server custom resource, which tells our operator to install it. So for one reason or another, that might not be there. You should be able to do kubectl get API servers to check that. If it's not there, it's pretty easy to create it.
So something in the Helm chart, maybe?
Perhaps, yes.
Well, if I remember correctly, there is a variable in the values.yaml of the Tigera operator that says if API server is enabled or not, which is set to true. So
Okay.
it should be enabled, probably.
So yeah, it should be enabled unless there's something wrong there that's preventing it from being enabled.
Cool.
Well, the way to check would be.
Okay, the thing is that in my local cluster, my local K3S cluster, this works. I mean, I can use kubectl to provide the input for what the configuration changes I want to do. And still in K3S cluster, I see the pod of the API server. Some point when I install the Calico, the Tigera operator, I see it for some seconds, like 20 seconds. It's there, see the pod, and then it's gone. But this still works. Even if the pod is gone and it's not visible, it still works.
That doesn't make sense to me.
So do we see anything in the logs for that, explaining why it's gone?
Sorry, I didn't know what logs to check.
Well, so okay, well, maybe we're the right path here. Is the key question in terms of the community meeting, I guess, is this meant to work? And the answer is yes, it is. So then I guess it just becomes a support thing. I have access to Erik and Casey, so I'm happy to kind of be the middleman and help figure it out. And we can tell you exactly what to check. If that works for you.
Of course, yes. Thank you very much.
Cool. Let's do that then, I think. But it doesn't sound like you've done anything obviously wrong. I saw Erik's face. You look surprised, Erik. So, all right, let's go from there, I guess. What I'll do is before I leave tonight, I'll get the initial questions to you, that the next set of questions, and we can debug from there.
Thank you very much, guys. Thank you.
That's all right.
Cool. So we've got 7 minutes left. Probably enough time to do a quick demo if folks are interested in seeing some of the Golang API stuff.
I have, sorry to interrupt. I have one other question I just remembered that I was hoping
Sure.
to ask you guys about. A while back, we tried the eBPF mode and we discovered a bug where when your core DNS pods moved from one host to another, the routing rules were not updated. We flagged it. There's a GitHub issue somewhere for it. I can try to find it. I just didn't find it this moment. I was just curious if anybody has looked at that, worked on it, if it's sort of gotten lost in the waysides. Does anyone remember that issue at all, or my?
I remember that issue. We still don't have an answer for that one. We are working through various issues that have come in from the community, like the kind of nasty issues like that are sort of deep and tricky to deal with. And we're working through some of those at the moment. I'm not sure if that one was on the list of ones that are kind of top to mind. So I do think we need to solve that one. So yeah, I'll push that one up the list. The one that's been worked on at the moment is we have an interesting issue where we're doing source IP preservation, and then a client decides to do something a little bit sketchy where they reuse a port. So load balancers do this a lot. So they reuse a port to talk to a different node port, a different node in the cluster on a node port, and then they both end up at the same backing host. So that one's quite a fun one to deal with. So we preserve the source IP and the source port, but that means you have two connections that arrive at your backing pod that have the same source IP and source port. So we're working on that one. But yeah, I think that this one probably comes in the same category of stuff that we should dig into.
Okay, I appreciate it. Thanks for the update.
I think that the issue there was we were doing connect time load balancing, and then nothing ever severs the DNS connection because it's UDP. So it's like your packets go into a black hole, but if your client doesn't care that its packets have gone into a black hole and kind of reconnect, then it doesn't sort it out. That's the issue there. It's a bit fiddly.
Yeah, I found the GitHub issue is 4509, just in case anyone wants to throw in the notes.
I will write that down because it looks like Chris is distracted. Probably don't have time for a demo, so I will save that for next time and keep everybody on the edge of their seats. But if there are any other questions or comments or thoughts, we've got a few last minutes to chat them over. If not, then I think we're at the end. Just thanks for coming, everybody. We'll meet again on the second Wednesday of October, which looks like it will be the 13th. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you. Bye-bye.